All right, so in this presentation, I'm going to go over LEED and living buildings. We're going to go over how LEED is determined, how you get a LEED score, some of the different characteristics that can help you get LEED points. We'll look at the certification levels, and then we'll dig into living building status, which is kind of like LEED on steroids. Like it's a really robust um, green building certification. And we'll look at kind of the main differences between LEED and living buildings. So, taking a step back and providing a little bit of context, the idea here is if we want to know how to tell how sustainable, quote unquote, sustainable a building is, how do we do that? How do we compare the sustainability of one building to another? Hopefully, you have a pretty good sense at this point that sustainability is this really broad topic, and it could address any number of things. So I want you to, feel free to press pause and think about like how would you know if a building's more sustainable than another? How would you come up with a rating system? And some things you could look at are things like renewable energy, but also you can think about water use. Buildings are a major user of water. Where they're getting their food from, where they're getting the materials from, where they're depositing their waste, the site, that they're building on, and so forth. And so there's really a lot of considerations if you sit down and think about it. And so in order to figure out how sustainable, however you define it, a building is, you need a way to measure it, right? And so that's why we need sustainability metrics. And we've already gone over a couple. But these metrics, the ones we're going to go over here, LEED and living buildings, are kind of more holistic. The other ones were more like energy focused. This one is, these are energy, but and all these other things as well, materials and um, the collaboration that was used to build the buildings, food, the soil, all kinds of stuff. Okay. So let's look at LEED first. This is the most common sustainable rating system in the world, actually. They use this all over the world. And in conceptually, it's fairly straightforward. And so it's just a point-based system, and you get different points. You get points for different things, different aspects of the sustainability of the design. So water use, energy use, do you use native plants? Do you use non-toxic materials? Do you not use non-toxic landscaping techniques? Do you build the building so that it can be integrated into the local transportation grid? Um, do you facilitate the use of electric vehicles and bicycles and pedestrian transportation? I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into this. What are you doing with the waste from both from the building the building, but also when you're using the building? So there's all kinds. I mean, it's very holistic. And what you do is there's a scorecard, and you're going to look over that in your quiz this week. But you basically just pick and choose. Like, I want to add a bunch of renewable energy. I'm going to use local materials. I'm going to recycle all my waste. I'm going to use water catchment. I'm going to use low flow shower heads, low flow sinks, whatever. So you go on down the line and you look at the list and you say, I'm going to do that, 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 and that. And there's points associated with each of those things. And so when you're going through the design process, you actually work with what's called a lead AP, which is a lead professional, which an available job in your industry. You can get a lead AP certification and do this sort of thing. And you'll work with a lead AP and you say, look, here's my building design, here's the architect's drawings, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, okay, well, based on this current design, you would end up with this many points. And those points correspond to certification levels. So we have certified. Okay, so you want to jot these down. Certified is 40 to 49 points. Silver is 50 to 59. Gold is 60 to 79. And then platinum is the highest, and that's 80 plus. Platinum's pretty hard to get, but there are a lot of platinum buildings out there if you search. And so you do the design, you say, and the lead AP will say, okay, based on your current design, let's say you're at a silver. And usually it's kind of this iterative process, and they say, look, are you happy with that? Okay, we can go with that. Or do you want to try to step it up and try to go for gold? Here are my suggestions on how to get gold. Like add some, I don't know, EV charging stations or whatever. And this will get you that many points, and you da 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 da, right? So you go down the line. And then at the end of the process, you're happy with your design. You say, look, based on that, I should get gold certification. Then they build the building. And as they're building the building, things can pop up and they may change the design. I mean, I've seen some of this happen where they end up changing some of the design. So you build the building, and then they test it at the building when it gets built. Now, this is really important, so you want to jot this down. They test the building for their lead points before anyone uses it. Okay, so it gets its certification before anyone uses it. In fact, sometimes you actually like can't use it at all. You have to let the building there before it gets the certification, then you can move in. Okay, so it gets the certification before, and you pick and choose the elements. And there's all kinds of categories. I'm not going to go over these. You can read these or do research. But these are all the sort of performance areas. So these are the different categories within a building. So sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy, atmosphere, materials, resources, indoor environment, air quality. So they use VOCs, that sort of thing. This is the transportation linkages, education. So if you use your building as an educational tool, you actually get points for that. Innovation gives you some points, and then sort of the regional, how it fits into the region. And then these are the different categories. So it's not just for new buildings. It's for existing buildings, commercial, interiors. Like you can see all of these neighborhoods. You get neighborhood LEED certification. So they keep branching out into encompassing more things. And so you can, there's a lot of flexibility in this, and there's all kinds of building. I mean, you can look on the GBC website or the Green Building Council. Let me go back real quick. The U.S. Green Building Council is the organization that runs this, and so they're a nonprofit third-party certifier, and they're the ones that oversee the whole program. And so you can go on their website and find LEED buildings all over the world. These are just a couple of examples. So you can have something really small like this 5,000 square foot building in Delaware. Here's a 132,000 plus square foot up in Delaware County outside of Philadelphia. This is a community college. This is LEED. I can't remember. I think it's LEED Silver, maybe LEED Gold. Here's one that you may recognize. This is on the Temple campus. This is the Tyler School of Architecture building. Gorgeous building, as you can see, as it should be. It's an architecture building, right? And art. But this is a LEED silver building. Then we have these other ones. I'm sorry, that's the Charles Library. My bad. Sorry, I'm not real familiar with the Temple campus. That's the Charles Library, which is a really cool building. And then that's a gold building. And then we have Tyler School of Art and Architecture, whether or not you know that. That's LEED silver. Parking garage of all things, Morgan Hall, Science and Education Research Center. So there's LEED buildings all over the place, including all over Philadelphia, and as you can see on the Temple campus. And they have a whole website with all of these listed on them. You can go to the Office of Sustainability to find details about these. And hopefully we'll see some of these when we take our building tour. So to summarize LEED, you pick and choose the aspects that you want to earn points, and then you get the one of the four certification levels based on that. You can ignore certain aspects. I mean, that's kind of one of the critiques of LEED is that you could have like a really efficient building with solar panels, but then you're using a bunch of water, right? So you don't have like low flow faucets and so forth, and you just build a building in an otherwise natural area, and so you're taking up the natural space. But you still get your certification because you got enough points. So that's one of the critiques of LEED. Um, and the other important thing to know is that certification is achieved before the building is used. And you'll see how that is different than Living Building Challenge. So Living Building Challenge, this thing is super robust. It is the strictest holistic sustainability, sustainable building rating system in the world today. I mean, I've seen a lot of these. I've researched a lot of these. I've talked to other people across the world. Well, let's put it this way, from my experience and from my research, this is by far the most robust one, the most difficult one to get. And you should watch the video that was posted, but they're trying to change how the whole building industry is operated and how buildings are designed. And so they want their buildings to actually make the world a better place. Sounds kind of silly, but they want to enhance the local environment, enhance the community, enhance work life, enhance everything about life that they can using their building instead of, building this big square building that just walls off, the world and is not necessarily holistically, addressing society's issues. And so they're trying to go beyond sustainable to regenerative, which is a really important concept in sustainability. Eliminate negative impacts of humans on the environment. Build buildings that improve health, improve habitat. So they want buildings that are actually help you become healthier, not, a lot of these buildings you have chemicals and other things that actually can reduce you know health, but they want to actually help it. They want to use biophilia, which is using nature as a model. And you want to jot this down. Living buildings, one of their philosophies is they all development projects should use nature as a measuring stick for performance. So I want you to think about what that means. And what they mean is they're using nature as a model for these buildings to the extent possible. And so when you build a building, it should be as close as possible to what nature does. They get their energy, it gets its energy from renewable energy. It gets all of its water that falls around it. It's integrated into the local ecosystem and so forth. So they want that to be the standard for buildings, which is a really, really high standards, as you can imagine. And you can, feel free to press pause and read this, but the point is they are advocating for an entire rethinking of how the industry, the buildings industry, is operated and designed. And they understand that we're facing these big challenges like climate change and water shortages and inequality and all of that, and they want to use buildings to address that. And so, make sure you watch that video. Um, and again, they kind of stress this, they want buildings to make the world a better place. They want to be regenerative. They want to enhance everything about the local community, the environment, everything. And a fundamental part of this is this recognizing that we are a part of nature, that we can't separate ourselves from nature. We are entirely dependent on nature for everything that we use to live. And we want buildings to support that goal. And they use their flower as a symbol, which is actually very deliberate. Um, and there's the main thing, if you think about a flower, um, it's just uses renewable energy, right? Just the sunlight that falls on its leaves. It only uses the water that falls on it or in its immediate surroundings, so it doesn't pull water from elsewhere. And also, it's, beautiful. It's aesthetic. It also fits into the local ecosystem. And so they want to think of our buildings as having those same functions. 100% renewable energy, only using the water that falls on or near it, actually enhancing the beauty of like it should be aesthetically pleasing and also integrated into the natural environment to the extent possible. And I'm not going to go over all of these, but there's a lot to this. But some of the highlights are it actually has to be net positive water, which means it actually has to, it can't take any water it uses in the building has to be less than the water that falls on it and around it. So it has to capture all the rainwater, store all of the water, and just use the water resources from the immediate area. Now it can be connected to the city system, but when you sort of compile it up and add it all up, like this much water falls on it, and this is how much water they're using, that has to balance out. And in fact, they have to use less, which actually recharges the local aquifer and so forth. So as I said, they're trying to make nature enhance it around them, so they're using less water than falls on it. Same with energy. They need to generate more energy than to use. That's what net positive energy is. And that's really closely related to net zero energy. And so you want to jot this down. Net zero energy is when you generate just as much energy from renewables as what you use over the course of a year. And so you can use more, let's say you have a lot of solar panels and you use more in the winter because you're not generating as much solar, but then in the summer you're generating excess, and so it's got to balance out over the course of a year. But there's all these other things. There no artificial fertilizers, so everything has to be organic, no red listed products. So these are chemicals. They must provide access to healthy food. I mean, there's just so much to all of this. Another really interesting thing is they must set aside an equal amount of land in perpetuity. So if you build a building that's 1,000, whatever, has 1,000 square foot footprint, you have to set aside 1,000 square feet of natural area forever somewhere else. Okay. And this is absolutely essential, and you want to jot this down. There are 7 categories that I'll go over here in a minute. And so, in order to be a true living building, you have to satisfy every single category. It's unlike LEED where you can sort of pick this and pick that and pick that and get your points. This, you can't pick and choose. You have to do absolutely everything to get full living building certification. The other really important distinguishing factor is that in order to get your certification, you don't get it until after you use the building for 12 consecutive months. So you want to jot that down as well. And so again, unlike LEED, where you get the certification before you use it, you don't get anything until after you actually use the building for 12 months. And if you think about it, you need to prove that you can operate the building using less water than falls on it and less energy than you generate, right? So you have to prove that you can do everything that your design says it's going to do. Now that's full living building certification, to be clear. You can also get pedal certification, so you can do individual things, but it's not a full living building. And you can think about there's a lot of, those are really big ways that they're different from LEED. Excuse me. Then these are the 7 categories: place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. So you can see this is very holistic. You have to meet all of these standards in order to get a full living building. So including equity, so supporting a just, equitable world, and all these other things I think are pretty straightforward. Excuse me. And you can dig into all of this on the website, but and this just shows you the different sort of subcategories within each, right? So the 7 petals: place, water, energy, health, happiness, materials, equity, beauty. And there's different aspects here. So there's really 20 things that you have to achieve. And a new building, you have to achieve, you see in the dark, you have to do every single one of these 20 things to their standards, or you don't get the living building status. And again, you have to demonstrate this after an entire year of living in the building. And so there are only a handful of living buildings across the world. Here's a nice one in Hawaii. It's a 6,000 square foot prep school. Um, you could read up more on that on the website. There are others in the world, but there really aren't that many. And so, to summarize living buildings, this is the most robust certification available. Remember, you have to satisfy all aspects to become a living building. This includes the net positive energy, net positive water, no red listed products, so no toxic chemicals, net zero habitat impact, so setting aside an equal amount of land in perpetuity. And remember, you only get the certification after using the building for a whole year straight. And the sort of philosophy here is to try to make buildings an asset to uh, people and communities and the environment. And ideally, we use nature as a measuring stick. So ideally, the buildings will do as close to as possible as what nature does. Provide their own, renewable energy. Don't use any water from outside. Make everything better, fit into the local biodiversity, and so forth. Okay, so they're moving toward regenerative, not just sustainable. And so hopefully after all this, you have an idea of how what LEED is and how it's determined, some characteristics of LEED buildings, and how the certification levels work, and then also a sense of what's required to get living building status, and ultimately what are the main differences between LEED and living buildings. And really, what I want you to think about is you're going to encounter both of these. Certainly, LEED as you work in the industry, or you'll probably see in a lot of classes too. Um, Living buildings are less common, but there are some living buildings with pedal certifications on the Temple campus, and there are elsewhere. And so these are things to be aware of. Um, we're certainly going to have to do something about the lack of sustainability of buildings, whether or not these two certifications are part of that. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But right now they are, especially LEED. LEED is the most common one. The living buildings are kind of like up and coming, so good to be aware of. Okay, so hopefully you enjoy that lesson and have a better sense of how to some green building certifications.